Hello, everybody. Hi there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that everyone can hear me, everyone can see me before I begin. So if you can hear me and you can see me and you're watching me live, give me a little wave or write something in the comments so that I know that you are there. If you are joining me on replay, then please do, again, feel free to say hello. And whilst we're waiting for people to find us, please do add into those comments, when did you, for your child, if they're sitting their exams in 2022, when did you start your practice papers? Please let me know. Let me know when you started them, because it's going to help me a little bit as I go through today. Perfect. I can see that somebody is hearing me and someone is there. Hopefully you can all hear me and you can see me. As I said, I'm going to wait just a couple of minutes to make sure that everyone knows I'm here. And indeed, I know that there are some of you who have already messaged me to say that you will be watching that replay. So hello to you guys as well. And I hope that everyone enjoys it, whether you're watching live or whether you are watching on the replay. But do feel free to please get involved. Let me know in the comments all about your practice papers. I'll be asking some questions in tonight's live, looking at things like where you are when you are looking at practice papers, what might be happening. And so yes, that should all be good. What I'm going to very quickly do, because I know that there is we're live in the group, but we don't appear to be live in the event. So I'm just going to add the link so that people can see, hopefully, and can find us. So let me just make sure that it's all there, and then we'll be good to go. So it should just be about 1 minute, guys, just whilst I sort that all out, and then we should be good. All right, so let me just, technology is a wonderful thing. Let me just see if I can add the link to where we are into the group so that nobody gets left behind and everyone can find us. There we are. Okie dokes. All right, so as I said, I will be starting in 1 minute. If you are waiting for me to start, please do let me know, when did you start practice papers? Have you not started them yet? Are you looking online and seeing everybody say that they're started, but they're not quite sure? So do let me know. And let me know kind of where you are in your preparation process. Perfect. So we should be good to begin. All right. So hopefully, if you're watching this, as I said, on replay, you are able to see me and to hear me. All right. Perfect. So a little bit of, I suppose, an introduction. About me, I've worked as a private tutor for about 10 years. I'm a qualified teacher, and now I run the Education Hotel, which offers 11 plus tuition, which is part of the reason I'm here, and summer courses. I also help students to find the right school using an education consultancy. I have been an admin here on the 11 plus journey for a couple of years. And one of the big things that I really like doing is going live and talking to you guys through the screen, and being able to give you some tips and tricks and see, you know, what you guys are feeling and hopefully add a little bit of value. So that's me. Sometimes you can find me. I speak, I write for Families Magazine from occasion, in the Telegraph, Guardian, etc. So typically found around education. But I also produce the wow words, which come in the group. So I suppose why now? Why am I talking about papers now? And I can see someone saying, you know, I've not started papers yet, and that's perfectly fine. What I want to make sure is that everyone starts at a different point, but kind of from February half term through Easter to now, typically students start to move to full papers, and lots of people start to approach me and my team, and they say, we really want to focus on boosting our preparation and really starting to really focus in on those exam papers. And one of the reasons that that students start to go into papers is so that they can start to see how long a whole paper is. And it might be that that your child is finishing off some syllabus bits. It might be that they have been doing parts of papers, so maybe short 10-minute tests or even 20-minute tests or part-way papers. But now you're thinking maybe they need that exposure, that time to spend on a whole paper. But as I wanted to say, everybody is different. Okay, so don't feel like, oh, I've seen Jemma do this talk. She said that we should do papers, and so we should, because it depends on where you started and it depends on where you want to end up. If you're aiming for a really competitive school and you started several years ago, your journey is going to look very different to someone who started recently and maybe is aiming for a less competitive school. But we do get lots of people who start asking in the 11 plus journey about papers. And so that's why I'm running this talk. But really, the importance of doing papers is something that I want to focus on. And as your student starts to finish the syllabus, exam papers, and whether that is mock, whether that is done at home, whether that's a postal, whether that's done in an exam hall, they've all got different kind of abilities, different things that might be able to help. Okay, so they've got different ways of showing your student how they might be able to improve. So I can see that one person's been brave enough to tell me a little bit about how they're using papers. If you are watching this, do let me know in the comments. Have you started papers? Are you starting them soon? If you've started them, how many of them have you done? Do let me know, and I can always respond. So there's 4 things that I really wanted to think about, which was kind of how to use these papers. Practice papers, past papers, I use the terms interchangeably. First is to highlight the areas that we need to be focusing on in revision. The second is to highlight the exam technique, and that's slightly different to the areas of revision. Third is really about highlighting what to do on the day. And fourth is about tracking your progress. And typically these are questions that people come to me and ask. So I thought, instead of reaching out to me this year, what I can do is I can create this video and I can help more of you who might be able to watch. So the first thing is really, when you are marking a practice paper, I want you not to just give it a mark. And I know that that's frustrating. And it's really frustrating as a student to not necessarily get a mark back, because that's all that we become focused on. I know that when I was at school, and indeed when I was taking my university exams and my teacher training exams, and when I was doing an essay, I wanted to know the mark straight away. I wasn't as interested in the feedback, but the feedback is really what helps you to improve. So don't just give it a mark. Don't just look at the mark and that's it. Really spend some time with your child going over that exam and looking over it and making sure and asking things like, how did you work this out? Was it something that you rushed? Did you guess at it? Show me how you worked it out. Give them a whiteboard and a pen and ask them to show you physically, how did you work that out? Because then it allows you to be able to see what was going on in their head. And one of the big things about 11 plus grammar exams in particular is that they're multiple choice. So we can't always tell why a child has picked something. They could have made a mistake picking the letter. They could have worked it out and then got a copying error where you look at it and then you see a completely different number when you go to mark the answer. It could be that they didn't know how to do it, and so they guessed it and it was a lucky guess. Or it could be that they eliminated, especially if they're doing something like non-verbal reasoning. Maybe they used a bit of elimination and they chose between 2 and the second one was the incorrect one. You don't know that until you ask them, until you work with them. So do spend time going through these papers, reflecting on them, especially if you're doing them at home and you've got them and you've got that mark scheme. I appreciate that for some mock exams, there might be a point where you don't necessarily get the mark scheme back or you don't get the paper back, and they are useful again, but in different ways. So this is if you can see that practice paper. I always say down here, try doing it yourself, but I know that parents are sometimes a little bit worried. So if there's a question that your child has explained how they've done it, and you're going, I can see how that worked, but it's not the right answer, please do ask on the 11 plus journey, because that's what people are here for. We're here to try and explain it. We're here to try and see, how we would have done it, or how as tutors maybe I would have taught something. And that can sometimes be a different method to what a child is using. Sometimes it can be a faster one. Sometimes it could be a way of speeding it up or making it accurate and making sure they can check it. And using all these different alternative methods and using them as checks can really help them to be able to speed up, but also speed up accuracy, because accuracy is the thing we're really aiming for at this point. Keep the questions that your child has struggled with, and then ask them again later. So take a screenshot if it's online, or a photo if you've got a paper version, and save them all somewhere, so that in August, hopefully when you rewatch this video, you're going, oh, what did Jemma say? She said something about to do in August. But you can bring all those questions back out and you can put them in front of your child, and you hopefully, if your child's worked on their technique, they should be getting more of those correct. And I do this even with my GCSE students. So my GCSE students are just about to start. One of them starts tomorrow. So what we've been doing is we've been going through past paper questions, not necessarily a whole past paper, but maybe chunks sometimes. Geography's tomorrow and it's a 2-hour paper. So we've been doing little bits, and then what we'll do is, if there's a question that's incorrect, take that question and I'll put it in a spreadsheet. It's got their name on it. And then I've got this big long list of all of the things that they got incorrect. And oddly for this student, I actually do all of their GCSEs. So that's the reason that I'm doing geography. I don't normally, but for this student, I kind of mentor them through everything. So it's worth keeping those questions, and for you guys, keep them somewhere online or keep them somewhere kind of at home. And then what you can do is you can make a whole paper out of things that you've done before. And it's very unlikely, especially in something like math, verbal, non-verbal, a little bit more so in English, but it's unlikely that your child will notice they're the same questions if you've left it. We're in May now, we're talking August. So do make sure that when you're doing those papers or question practices, you are taking the bits that you're interested in, or the bits that your student's not scoring so well in, and you're making sure that you're keeping those. So someone's asked a really great question about the regularity of papers. Do you do a paper every day? Ultimately, it depends on your child. So I know some parents who will, and I know some parents who really will do a couple of papers, and that's it. There are some advantages to doing it. There's some advantages to not. I'll take you through kind of the pros and the cons. The pros of doing papers regularly, and not necessarily every day, because I feel like every day would be quite a lot. But if you're doing something like English, math, your verbal and non-verbal, and you're rotating those, actually it's less intensive. But if you were to do something like a paper maybe every other day, then what your child sees is they see lots of different questions. And that means that they therefore get the exposure to a lot of different questions. The cons of that is that you probably aren't spending a lot of time going over those mistakes. And it's going over the mistakes where it's really important. So what I would be doing would be using a paper to then direct that week's learning. So for me, when I work with students for 11 plus, we'll do a set of papers, and that might be all 4 at the weekend. And then what we'll do is we'll pick out those areas, the areas where it was maybe silly mistakes, the areas where it was not silly mistakes and it was learning things. And I'll do extra questions on those. And that will mean that I'll go back through workbooks. I'll look through maybe bond books or Galore or First Past the Post, Schofield, whatever kind of books that pick up on that topic. And I'll make sure that we've re-revised it. And then I'll make sure that we've done some practice questions, because that reflection is more important than simply going through. Because if you just keep going on a paper, as you'll see a little bit later, it doesn't necessarily teach a lot. The importance is really on the review. So I would add the emphasis on the review as opposed to the regularity of doing the papers. But there is definitely a kind of a worthwhile thing in terms of talking about doing papers regularly. So I've got some kind of indicators that says that your child might need to focus on specific topics. So the first thing is, if you're missing large amounts of that test paper, your child sat down, first test paper that they're doing, and they have a large amount of it missing, big chunks, you need to go back to the basics. Either your child's really panicked, in which case you need to have a conversation with them. They need to get used to taking those papers. Or it says that your child is missing something and it's fairly large. So go back. Don't do any more past paper practice. It's going to stress you out. It's also going to stress your child out, and work instead on making sure that maybe they can do it in smaller chunks and building up that time, or that you're making sure that you've gone over the basics. It might just be it's the first time they're ever sitting down and doing a test, and that might be it. Or it might be that they aren't used to seeing questions in that particular format. And that's why I like to use different past test providers or practice paper providers, because that allows students to be able to see different types of formats. And we know that the 11 plus changes, and sometimes it changes with less notice. So I like my students to be prepared, and I like them to feel like they can go into that exam and they can say, I've done all these different types of questions, so I don't need to worry if something comes up that's slightly different. So that's part of that confidence building for me. So if large amounts of that test is incorrect or missing, go back to the basics. If there's smaller little bits, this is where I was saying that reteach and rerun. So pick out those areas where a student has struggled, reteach them, teach it maybe in a slightly different way. Come on to the 11 plus journey, ask us, how would you tackle this question? See, is it different to the way that your child tackles it? If it is, go through a different, or maybe an alternative method. Those alternative methods can sometimes really click. Maybe the first method didn't quite work for a student. This one, maybe it works. And so that is why it's worth going back, reteaching, run some mini tests, run some kind of 5-10 mark questions, short amounts, make sure they've got it. And that means that next time it comes up, they shouldn't make that same mistake again. Other things that you might want to do, if you're looking at kind of smaller areas and they're continually getting those small areas wrong, but when they're doing the mini tests with you, they're getting them fine, it might be that they need reminding just before the exam. So it might mean that they always forget that there's 60 minutes in an hour. And you find that they're continually over and over and over again assuming the 100 instead of 60 rule. That's something that can easily be put up onto a poster, and they can design that poster and they can stick it on their wall. And it's something that therefore is helping them revise it in a different way. So sometimes it's not just question practice that's going to make it better. Sometimes it's really doing something different. So typically it's easier to see that on math, but the same thing happens with verbal, non-verbal. If they're really struggling with cube questions, then it might mean that you need to teach cubes a different way. So if you were previously running through a set of rules and they're struggling to remember those rules, try it practically. If they're struggling with understanding it, practically try nets. So there's different ways of teaching so that they can work out kind of what works. And when they're thinking, it's sitting there in the exam thinking about, okay, how do I do nets? They haven't just got one method, they've got lots and lots. Sometimes you can do a paper and maybe your child's got like 5 to 7 marks wrong and they all seem completely spread out. And you're thinking, well, how do I know what to focus on? That's why I'd say keep a spreadsheet or a log of those questions, because although you might not see it right away, you will see it as you start to go through them. And we've got a checklist. I can add it into the comments. I've put down here to remind myself to do that. Where what I do is I'll go along and I'll tick it off. So I'll say, oh, this exam had this type of question and this type of question and this type of question, and my student did really well on this and they struggled on this. And the next time that type of question comes up, I'll do the same thing. And then you can start to see patterns. So with math, it is typically you can mark it against a topic list. With English, again, there is a topic list. We've got a topic list for English, but you can further group those questions: word, meaning, inference, quotes, non-verbal reasoning, verbal reasoning. There are categories, so you can get kind of 26 different types of question, and you can see where is it that my child typically struggles. So those are some of the things that are worth looking at. This is a kind of typical question that I know people often come to me with. They say, oh, but Jemma, my child's scoring really well. They're getting 80s, 90% on this publisher, but not on this publisher. So the moment they start this type of publisher, they go down. And I go, great, because that's kind of the joy of having different publishers, because it's about being able to use different types of question, and often they will dip as they go on to a different publisher. And that might be because the questions are trickier, and some of the publishers are trickier than others. But it also might be because they're seeing a different style of question. So typically when I work a lot with competitive or super selective schools, and I will use lots and lots of publishers, because I want my students to see different types of questions. And that means they're not phased on the real thing. And typically I'll move them, as I said, from really short 10-minute tests to maybe 20 minutes. And sometimes if I can't find a 20-minute, I just put 2 10-minutes together, or I'll cut a real thing. I'll cut a real thing in 3, and then I'll give them those different bits, and I'll see how they do on each one. So don't be afraid to maybe change the style or change the ordering. If you've got, say you've got a 45-minute amazing slot where your child can sit down really focused on a Saturday morning, but your papers are an hour, and the papers that you've got, they're an hour long, don't be afraid to take a bit out. And you can always combine those and form a later paper. So don't feel like you're stuck because you've got that specific format that it has to sit with, because ultimately different publishers have different formats. Okay. And then we've got things that happen with not finishing and things that happen with finishing quickly. So I know that some of you will be watching this going, oh, my child rushes through. But if your child is not finishing, there's probably a couple of reasons. Lack of understanding, and we'll see that because a whole subsection has been missed or is incorrect. Lack of stamina. Typically, you see a really great work up until kind of like 3/4 of the way, and then it just doesn't go so well. That tells us that usually your child is really great at focusing, but they run out of energy and they run out of stamina. And that is a test taking thing. They need to be able to focus for that long, or keep the energy up for that long. So that is practice. That's practice of doing slightly longer tasks. That is really practicing. Maybe taking a mini break in the middle if they're really struggling. And for my students, a mini break looks kind of similar to, often we do it when we're stressed. So we put our pens down, put our palms on the table, look up, look down, deep breath, release, pick our pen up. And it takes less than a minute. But that sometimes can be a bit of a reset. And often what I'll say to a student is, you're taking 2 tests back to back, and you're going to mark where the first half is, and you're going to take that mini break. And that sometimes helps with the stamina. You can notice sometimes if your child has a lack of focus. They have a lack of focus. They're, looking out the window, twiddling their hair, taking a lot of water, playing with the cap on the water, doodling. you'll find that is a focus issue. And that is, again, it's about being able to take those exams and having the maturity to take those exams and being able to sit there and know what you need to do. And sometimes that is a harder thing to do, because we've got students of different kind of ages and different maturity levels. So often with that lack of focus, it is about making sure that you can break it up for them so that they know exactly where they need to be at certain times. So if they're a kind of competitive, but maybe they haven't got that focus, you can make sure that they are aiming for certain things. They're aiming for certain marks or certain timings. That can help with that focus a little bit. And ultimately, and this is a warning, everyone finds test taking stressful. So there will be a point where your child will likely cry or panic and they won't finish. And that's fine, because that is a lesson on how we get ourselves out of panic. Because so many times, and I work with students full time, sometimes I'll live with them when I'm helping students for really highly selective independence. If I'm working with expats or people who are international, I might spend a long time with them. And I have students who will cry or will panic when they're taking an exam. And it happens in mocks too. It happens in mock exams. You get a student who will just completely panic it. And whilst nothing can be done at that time, there is something to be done afterwards. And it is about working out, how can your child deal with that panic? How can they recognize that panic is starting and get themselves out of it? Because it will likely be that if they look at that paper when they're calm, they'll be fine. It's just that they've gotten themselves into that mental state where they're panicking and they can't see anything about it. So you really want, when that happens, if that happens, you want to work with your child to make sure that they can overcome that panic. So one of the things that I do with my students is, if they feel that panic, first of all, they do the breathing exercises that we work with, and we've got a number of them that we use. Then they might do a bit of visualization. Again, I work with them on that. And then if they're really struggling and they're really feeling that panic, they go to the bathroom. They look at themselves in the mirror. They tell themselves that they can do it. They splash their face with water and they go back in and they start again. And that is a routine that they have learnt because they have panicked before and they've been unable to continue. So that is something that I work with students on as well. And it's all those kind of little exam techniques that you're working through as you're looking at these papers. Finishing too quickly. Again, it can show a lack of understanding because it means your child has just skipped a whole section. Again, it can show a lack of stamina. It means that your child just wants to finish and be done, and they throw their pen down on the floor and they go, that's it, I'm done, and I don't want to do it again. And that means that they're not checking, typically. So these are often the students who are rushing, and they've made a whole load of silly mistakes, often. If you get a run of several questions wrong, often, especially in nonverbal, I find this happens. They spent a really long time on the first one, and then they panicked, and then they rushed everything afterwards. And you can really, really clearly see this, both in the grammar and in something like the ISEB pretest. I do a lot of ISEB pretests with my students. I use often Exam Paper Plus's online system, and I can see a whole row of questions where they've rushed. And I'll sit down with them and I'll take those questions again. And I will work with them and I'll give them to them in a different setting and they'll be fine. And it's because I've taken the first one away. And I'll say to them, right, we need a technique. And when I talk about exam techniques, someone's just asked, I'm talking about how a student takes an exam rather than what they need to know to take an exam. So you might have all the knowledge, but when you sit down to do an exam, how are you making sure that all of your marks are marks that you have focused on? And you might know it, but how can you make sure that you're making the right decisions in the exam? So if you're panicking, how can you get yourself out of it? If you need to check your work, checking is one of those big things that we teach and we work on for so long, because so many students don't see the difference between looking to see if I marked an answer and checking. Seeing that run of several questions and saying, okay, that probably means that you panicked on the first one, or you spent ages on the first one and then you rushed. How are we going to deal with that? That's what I talk about when I talk about exam technique. Not, do I know codes questions or do I know times tables? It's more, do I know how to do the exam? Okay. Typical question that comes up, and I know it comes up because people reach out to me and they ask me, and I love it when people reach out to me and ask me. So please do. But often, sometimes I redirect you back here. So if you've been redirected to this video and it's a recording, this is the reason I probably redirected you. You've probably got a hold of me and said, my child's really struggling. Do we just keep doing more tests? No is the answer, because your child is not going to miraculously get better. What you're doing is probably denting their confidence and probably stressing yourselves out. And if you look at it, if your car broke down at the end of every road, would you keep driving it? No, you'd stop, you'd do a service, you'd get somebody in, you would work on it, and then you would do it again. So think of that when your child is taking exams. There's a reason. The reason behind why they may not have gotten the score that you were hoping for, and work on the reason, not necessarily on the score. Okay, I know that somebody in the comments has asked about mocks, and this is the part. So, is the mock exam online or classroom test preferable? Oh, perfect. I'm about to answer that question. Which months can they started and how many? Okay, so this is kind of what this section is all about. Mock exams, it's really important that your child knows why you're doing them. And it might be obvious to parents. They might say, well, of course they know why I'm doing them. It's a mock exam. But really the reason that you're doing them might not be to check their knowledge. It might be so they get the chance to do it in an environment with other students, alongside timing, and with other adults. So you make sure that they know the reason that that's there. Because the point of doing a mock exam might not be to look at your scores. It might well be, and I know that there are tutors and exam providers, and there are parents I know who are quite vocal on 11 Plus Journey, who did mock exams, and I know that their children didn't do very well, but it was a great learning experience because it helped them to figure out, okay, what would you do if you panic? What would you do if this happened? And actually that can be really useful. So make sure it is clear to your child. Mock exam, and how is it different to kind of practice papers or maybe postal and online mocks? And it is worth saying at this point, I am going to mention I run a summer course. It has mock exams in it. So just as a kind of blanket. So face-to-face mocks. Face-to-face mocks can really help students to understand what taking that test is like. They're physically there. How does it feel when everyone else is taking the test and they're all rustling their papers and they're all going through it quicker than you? Can you stay on task? Can you focus with all of that happening? Because actually that in itself is a skill. That's kind of a technique. So, what do you do when these things happen can often be helped with a face-to-face mock, because that face-to-face mock is about trying to simulate the conditions that your child will be in when it comes to that day. But that's not to say an online or a postal mock can't add value. And we've got online mock exams. And one of the things that we introduced this year for our more intensive summer courses is an online mock. And the reason that we did that was a mock exam or a practice paper can help us as tutors or parents to see, are the students using the techniques that you've been teaching? If you've designed that paper and you know what you've taught beforehand, and you know that is something where a student typically doesn't get it right, can you see if they're using that technique? It allows you to objectively mark. And I know that I've been there when I've been marking a student's 11 plus paper, and typically in English or a longer mark question, not necessarily an A, B, C, D, and they've not quite met the mark scheme, but maybe. And also in creative writing, it can be really hard to be objective when there's no other people to mark them against. So that can be a real useful help. Ranking. Ultimately, whilst a lot of people ask us about scores, what score should my child be achieving? Ultimately, it's about their ranking. It's not necessarily about their score. Whilst their score will help on their ranking, the best you can do is being at the top of the ranking. So doing it alongside other children and being marked alongside other children therefore allows you to see where is a child coming within that ranking. Also, how closely packed are they in that ranking? So is it that your child came 5th, but actually there was only 2 marks between them and the child who came 1st? In which case that's an easy fix. So really looking at kind of how that child might perform can be done with an online or a postal mock as well. So there are different reasons why you might choose to do certain mocks. And I know that some people choose to do many and some people choose to do few. And ultimately, I would say think about the reason that you're doing them and make sure that that reason is really clear to your child. Because if they're doing lots and lots of mocks and they don't know why, and often they're just getting marks given back to them, it really doesn't help for confidence and it doesn't help for understanding, because you feel like I'm just doing another one. And sometimes I see children who go to many mocks and who every weekend is a mock exam, and they say to me, oh, it doesn't matter. This score doesn't matter because I've got another one the next weekend. And you want to think about the message that you're sending to your child about doing those mock exams. Tracking progress, and I'm almost done. I think I probably talked for longer than I should have, but I get quite enthusiastic about these topics, so I do keep talking. One of the things I really like is using a traffic light system, and it really helps my students to be able to see where they're getting things right, where they might need to work through, and where is a little bit variable. And often it's the variable that my students really notice. They know what they need to work on. They know what they're good at. But sometimes I'll say to them, oh, this is an orange topic. Oh, no, it's not. I get everything right in it. And then I can prove to them, I can say, oh, no, this one was wrong and this one was wrong. Why was that? Oh, I wasn't paying attention, or, oh, I was doing this. And then we work on it. And we work mainly on the reds and the oranges. And we work on alternative ways to solve them, or ways to check them, or ways to make sure they're more accurate. All of those kind of reteaching, revising stuff, and making sure that there is that revision of knowledge as opposed to just testing. Calling out the mistakes, but not where. So telling your child, you've made 4 mistakes in this paper, but not telling them where, because that means that then you're seeing how long does it take them to go back and check that work. You're not giving them any guidance. You're not saying it's on question number 19, question number 20. You're just saying to them, there are 4 mistakes, and see how long it takes them to recognize those mistakes. Do they recognize those mistakes? Because that helps us learn about checking. And checking is one of the most important things in terms of increasing percentage. When someone comes to me and they say, I've got a student who is doing maybe 65%, what is the biggest thing that's going to get them higher? It's going to be checking. It's going to be that they are making probably lots of silly mistakes. They probably don't know some topics, but if they can start thoroughly checking and they know how to check, it is a skill, then you can start to see those marks improve. And as I've said before, it's absolutely fine to rerun a paper or to take questions from a few papers. It's also a great way to boost your child's confidence. So typically, if you're looking towards the end of the kind of practice time, and you're looking, just kind of end of summer, and you're thinking, how can I make sure that my child's confidence is really high? Because walking in there, knowing that they know what they're doing, that's something I really want. Then do try and dig out maybe some of those questions that that are ones that they are comfortable with, and mix in some of the ones that they're not so comfortable with, and try them on a paper of kind of what's pre-seen stuff. They would have forgotten it by then, especially if it started really early. So do make sure that that's something that you can do. And as I've said, confidence. So test papers should be there to stretch and challenge, but they have a role in reassurance. For a student to be able to walk into the exam confident, they need to believe in themselves. They need to know that you believe in them. And one of the ways that they can do this is by seeing the marks increase in a paper. So if you are looking to really push your child, consider when you're adding those most difficult of papers, because you would not want to damage their confidence just before they go into an exam. So do think about confidence, and confidence is something I think is really important when we're talking about students. So that kind of leads me on to the last part, which is a little bit of a pitch, which is that obviously the Education Hotel has summer courses. One of the things that they focus on is confidence, and we're running them throughout summer. And we do a 3-week, and that includes mock exams. We also do a 1-week, and that 1 week is focusing on creative writing or English or math or nonverbal or verbal reasoning, allowing you to choose what you would like. If you have further questions about that, please do reach out to me. I'll put my details in the chat. And if you've got any other questions and you're watching this either on replay or you're watching it on live and thinking, Jemma has not answered the question that I really want to know, please do add those questions in the comments. I always go through the comments. I love to read the comments once I'm finished, and sometimes when I'm in the live as well. I won't forget the checklist. I will make sure I pop it down. But thank you everyone for listening, whether you're listening live or on replay. As I said, I am Jemma. I am from the Education Hotel, and I have loved speaking with you this evening. So thank you ever so much for joining. And I think that's probably it from me this evening. You've probably also had enough of my speaking, so you are probably ready to close the screen and let me go. I will stick around in the comments. After probably I'll go to grab some dinner or something. But if you do have any questions, pop them in the comments. I'll make sure that I get back to you, and I will bid you all good night. And hopefully you found it enjoyable, you found it useful. Thank you ever so much for attending. All right then. Bye bye.